He was drafted into the Army Air Force on February 25th, 1943. Once Art arrived at the base, he began training as a tail gunner for a B-17 heavy bomber. Art was sent to general training for 3 weeks. Typical training time lasted 6 weeks. How long your general training was depended on your instructor and how much time you wanted to put in, Art said. After general training, Art went to Scottsfield, Illinois for radio training. Upon completing radio training, Art went to gunnery school in Fort Myer, Florida. The next leg of training was at Avon Park, Florida for overseas training, or OTU. While there, he met the other men who would become his crew. Soon after OTU was completed, Art and the crew were sent to Savannah, Georgia to pick up a new B-17. They began their trip heading to the war front. Art was the tail gunner of the lead aircraft in the squadron while heading to Gander, Newfoundland. Art remained there for a few days with his crew. After the layover, they all boarded the same B-17. Art and his crew soon set out for Wales, which is one of the 4 countries that make up England. Once landed, we got out and the people from the base took our plane away. We asked them, "What are you doing?" And they replied, "Taking her to wash." To have your plane washed was a symbol of respect. This was the tangible way they could show appreciation to the crews for their service. Art's next stop was advanced gunnery training. Throughout training, there were many different drills that were required to advance to a higher skill level. One drill the gunners enjoyed was shoot the can. To gain experience, the instructors decided to mount a 50 caliber machine gun to the bed of a truck. Picture this, a 1930s pickup loaded down with lively American boys from all over the United States. We sat on the top, we sat inside, we sat in the bed, and everywhere else we could think of, said Art. The instructor drove the truck out to a mound of dirt used as the backstop on the shooting range. While there, Art and the other gunners became familiar with techniques they would use in air combat. Closer to the end of training, the gunners became so skilled at aiming and shooting the can that they could keep the can dancing up the hill until it sat on top. As young men often do, they turned a training exercise into a game. The can was tossed to the foot of the hill. Each gunner took turns shooting short bursts at the can. Soon they learned how to propel the can heavenward and keep it there until all the gunners had a chance to rotate through. This game was not only fun, but kept the gunners focused on the target and mentally on their toes. A little while earlier, you may have been wondering, why did a tail gunner need so much training? After all, he just needs to know how to shoot. Well, the tail gunner had more jobs than just trying to shoot down enemy aircraft. Along with the normal gunning responsibility, the tail gunner had to count and look for parachute deployment of men who bailed out of their aircraft, be it friend or foe. Tail gunners had to be alert and awake at all times to watch for enemy aircraft coming from behind. Only a few tail gunners had the experience of using a signal light. Each squadron has a unique letter painted on their vertical stabilizer. A signal light was used only by the first tail gunner in the squadron to communicate with other bombers. The tail gunner would flash his squadron tail identification letter in a series of dits and dashes, also known as Morse code. If the tail gunner saw a bomber that did not belong in the squadron, he would signal one solid red light. This meant you had found yourself in the wrong squadron and needed better directions from your navigator. More often than not, your biggest worry would be getting hit by direct fire. There was another major weapon that was used to slow down an aircraft. It was flak. Flak was taken from the German word Fliegende Kanonen. There were multiple sizes of shells, each exploding at a different altitude. Crews learned to identify the size of the shell by the color of its smoke. 88 millimeter shells produced black smoke. 105 millimeter shells created red smoke. And 155 millimeter shells tended to create a white smoke. The 88 millimeter shells were usually shot in a line, in groups of 4 with a slight vertical incline. Once 88 millimeters were spotted, the crews could help direct the pilot to maneuver around the next 3 anticipated shots. 105 millimeter and 155 millimeter were generally single shots and designed to go to a higher altitude before exploding. You didn't need to worry about these most of the time, unless you were above them. Then it wasn't pretty, commented Art. On Art's third mission, wake-up call was 2 o'clock a.m. Breakfast was at 3 o'clock, and then mission briefing. At mission briefing, Art and his crew learned their target was Crepy, France. Art and his crew left the base and arrived at their target with fairly little disruption. After dropping their bombs, they were ready to head for home. 15 minutes later, they flew into a barrage of flak. The flak exploded, sending fragments through the aircraft, injuring the pilot. A piece of shrapnel entered the pilot's leg at the ankle, forcibly tearing through muscle and tissue before exiting his leg at the knee. It rendered his body unconscious and limp. The wound began gushing warm blood, which filled his boot until it overflowed. The co-pilot took over the controls and announced with great confidence over the intercom, "Don't worry, boys, I'll get you home." Unfortunately, he had never landed a B-17 in combat. 5 hours later, they arrived at the Army Air Force Base in Pulbrook, England. They released flares, which meant they were wounded aboard, giving them the first priority to land. Just before landing, the pilot regained consciousness. He grabbed the controls, landed the plane, and then slumped over in his seat, unconscious once again. He was given 7 blood transfusions while still sitting left seat. After about 45 minutes later, he was stabilized enough for the medics to remove him from his seat. He was then taken to the hospital to receive further emergency care. Art's 11th mission was his most memorable. It took place on July 28, 1944. Just like all 10 missions before this one, Art and his crew rose early from bed, ate breakfast, and went to mission briefing. While there, they learned details and the location of the mission. Our mission was to bomb an oil refinery in Merseburg, Germany. When flying, our altitude was 23,500 feet, Art recalled. Art and his crew were flying tail and Charlie. It had been a fairly uneventful flight to the target. Art's crew had experienced minimal difficulties and had successfully dropped their bomb load. They were now on their return flight. Some may think this is the easiest part of a mission, but let me assure you, this is where the challenge begins. You may have gotten there safely, but getting home was the hardest part. Art and his crew were 15 minutes into their return flight when a Focke-Wulf 190 A8 German fighter appeared at their 6. The Focke-Wulf began firing immediately. The German pilot shot all around Art's legs and feet and thought he was dead. The Germans shot out engine numbers 2 and 3 and disabled the supercharger in number 4. The Focke-Wulf also shot out the ball turret, sending the gunner plummeting to the earth. The Focke-Wulf came around again. Art was ready. He fired and hit the Focke-Wulf, which began a marginal dive. The pilot ejected the fighter. Art did not see the German's parachute open and presumed him dead. Art looked out his window toward the nose of the aircraft. Even though Art had shot him down, the pilot had fired shots and severely damaged the B-17. Oil was spewing out the engines. It was spraying and coating the fuselage. The bomber was slowing and losing altitude rapidly. The pilot was forced to drop out of formation. He would have to fly lower. The pilot nursed the heavy bomber along on 1.5 engines. This made them an easy target for the enemy. About 5 minutes later, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 appeared. The German pilot saw Art's bomber had been shot up. The tail end was in such poor condition it resembled a cheese grater. The German decided to get a closer look at the lone B-17. This could be easy pickings for any fighter pilot who wanted credit for shooting down an American heavyweight bomber. As he assessed the bomber, he noticed the ball turret missing. He took on strategic placement where the top turret could not reach him. The waist gunner was injured and unable to perform his duties, and Art's guns were unable to swivel far enough around. All the crew could do was hope and pray. There were no gunners that could reach the German. "Everybody stay off the intercom at Kempy," the co-pilot told his crew. "The line must stay free from chatter. Watch him, Kempy, he's coming back." The Messerschmitt pilot had lowered his flaps. The fighter began to deliberately slow. He was moving in for the kill. Art sat on his saddle seat, completely motionless. He saw the Messerschmitt out of his peripheral vision at about a 45-degree angle to his left. He waited patiently for the exact moment the fighter would be in range. It was now or never. Art swung his guns around with all his might. He squeezed the triggers of his .50 caliber machine guns. He hit the German with deadly shots that sent the fighter plunging with merciless speed. The pilot looked at Art with ghastly surprise. Art could only imagine what the pilot was thinking when he saw the face of the young man who was barely 20 he had previously presumed dead. The fighter exploded as it plummeted through a cloud layer never to be seen again. Air was swirling all around inside the heavily damaged bomber. Even at lower altitude, it was cold. A P-51 was outside of Art's window. The American fighter would escort them through the English Channel. All Art could do was sit there. He knew his guns would not work properly if needed. He had forced his .50 calibers to their limit and beyond. They were beginning to bow and had turned blue. Beads had formed on their tips that resembled slag due to the long rapid firing. Art's pilot flew the shot-up B-17 toward their base. He dropped colored flares to warn of wounded and landed with only 1.5 working engines. At the base, things were hopping. Glenn Miller and his orchestra would be playing that evening. Art got out of the heavily damaged B-17. While walking toward the hangar, he heard someone from the orchestra remark, "They really got shot up." It was time for debriefing. All Art's surviving crew members received congratulations and a shot of whiskey. It had been a long day for everyone. The base captain asked Kemp to see his guns. Art already knew their condition. He was ordered to remove and properly dispose of them. They had served their purpose and given all they had for the pursuit of freedom. The captain gave Art a pat on the back and wished him luck. Sometime after debriefing, Art learned that the pilot of the Focke-Wulf 190 fighter he shot down was a German ace. His name was Ernst Erich Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld had served about 100 missions for Germany and had credit for a Russian-like fighter and 24 American heavyweight bombers, including B-17 and B-24 bombers. Hirschfeld had met his demise when his parachute failed to open after he ejected his fighter. If you consider the total number of airmen aboard each heavy bomber, the potential number of lives that may have been lost would be in between 200 and 240. Who is to know how many lives were saved because of one man's patience and good aim? While watching the 1940s theatrical presentation of the Memphis Belle, it was said that the best defense against enemy fighters was a tight formation. Of course, any World War II veteran gunner would have his own views on this. "That is true," said Art, "unless you have good gunners." With a smile on his face, he continued, "And we had good gunners." One thing that tight formations couldn't protect these flying fortresses from was mid-air collisions and friendly fire. As I listened intently, Art began telling another story as if he was reliving it. Art said, "It was just another mission." He explained he was flying as the lead aircraft in their squadron. As he watched from the tail gunner position, he could see all of the other B-17s following behind in formation. Then it happened. He could not believe what was unfolding before his eyes. A B-17 in tight formation flew too close to the bomber in front of it. This caused the heavy bomber to get sucked into prop wash from the front aircraft. The pilot panicked and slowed too aggressively, causing loss of control. He got too close to the bomber next to him. Their wings collided. The wings on a B-17 give some structural support to the fuselage. The stress induced by the strike and the loss of a wing was too great. The fuselage snapped in half. The nose section of the massive aircraft plummeted to the earth as the tail slowly floated back and forth like a leaf floating to the ground on a warm autumn day. With glassy eyes and a somber voice, Art said, "There weren't any shoots to count." Both B-17 crews perished without a single enemy shot being fired. The emotional strain these veterans faced was real. Some things you can never unsee. Those living still carry memories of these events with them every day. Some may tell you of their struggles, while others hold their secrets deep within. It is only when they pass do some find peace from the horror of war. It gives me great pleasure to call Kemp my friend. His World War II stories never get old. I learn something new every time he tells one. When I look into the eyes of this veteran, I am so appreciative of his sacrifice for my country. If I look close, I can catch a glimpse of the courage and bravery that filled the eyes of a young tail gunner so long ago.